Welcome back, everybody. We begin this next half hour in Seaford, where Purdue Farms is stepping up efforts to become Delmarva's leader in renewable energy.
They recently landed a deal with a Maryland company that plans to bring a new technology to the area and help them succeed.
To help Purdue Farms become more environmentally friendly, Bioenergy DevCo plans to build what could be the first large-scale facility on Delmarva that converts poultry manure into energy.
I'm Carly Rizzuto, and this is episode 5, the final episode of No Land Farms. In 2019, in Sussex County, Delaware, Purdue Farms agreed to sell its agri-recycle facility to Bioenergy DevCo in a 20-year agreement to bring chicken waste to its soon-to-be biogas plant. Biogas plants, as you heard in the news clip, are marketed as renewable energy facilities and as a waste solution for large-scale animal ag. Here's Rebecca Wolf, the food policy analyst from episodes 2 and 4, explaining the big picture of what we should know about these facilities.
They're the latest get big or get out scheme. Not only are they a climate scam, but they only work on the big operations. They only work for the big operations. There's a huge concern with driving more and more consolidation because of them. So not only are they greenwashed as a solution to the climate crisis, but they're also really complicated and they're expensive. And the reality of the infrastructure is biogas methane digesters are actually devices that are used to both capture and maximize the production of methane. So, very dubious at best.
So Bioenergy DevCo, which has since rebranded to BTS Bioenergy, is constructing a biogas plant in Seaford, Delaware to be a large-scale anaerobic digestion system producing and collecting gas from poultry industry waste to then sell it to gas companies, labeling it as renewable gas since it, prior to a lot of processing, comes from animals. To do this, they have to build a massive industrial park. The Seaford plant will have 4 digesters where the gas gets produced. That gas produced and collected, as Rebecca mentioned, is mostly methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. Methane is what's mostly in the gas that fossil fuel companies frack and sell, also commonly referred to its greenwashed name, natural gas. Here's how the plants work.
What is happening with a digester is you're putting all of the feces, urine, guts, litter, bedding, feathers, waste, all of that junk from factory farms, sticking it in a tank where it ferments in anaerobic conditions. And then basically 3 things are produced. You've got the solids, the gases, and the liquids. So liquids are now a contaminated water waste stream. Solids are actually called digestate, and it's just the digested solids. It's like the concentrated nutrients. We know from our work in the Bay that nutrient pollution is the problem. So now we've got concentrated nutrients. And then you've got biogas, which is composed of a couple different gases, methane being one of them. In order to get that pure methane, you're either burning or off-gassing the carbon dioxide and some of the other trace gases that are there.
According to BTS Bioenergy's permit documents, poultry processing plant and hatchery waste from 15 different locations across Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, so not a Delmarva state, will truck their poultry waste to Seaford. These processing plants and hatcheries are large-scale industrial facilities owned by Mount Air, Purdue, Amick Farms, Allen Harim, Tyson, and Valley Protein's Darling Ingredients. So even though the project has been advertised as converting chicken litter to energy to be a solution to Delmarva's problem of having way too much chicken waste than can be spread on the land, the majority of the waste coming to the facility will not be poultry litter from farmers' chicken growing operations. It will be the sludge, the slurry, and the wastewater from some of the wealthiest chicken integrators. Here's what Maria, who you heard from in the previous episodes, said about the Seaford facility.
So what I really think people should know is that it matters where we put things, right? That's why we have zoning. And to take something that's going to be a small refinery, basically, and put it in the middle of a community where the closest neighbors, we have two populations. One is English as a second language Latino. One is English as a second language Haitian. This is not thought out well. You are talking about bringing in waste from multiple states to this one location. I told you about the quality of our waterways. We can't manage our own. Why are we bringing in other people's waste, right? You're talking about up to 250,000 tons a year, up to 73,000 tanker trucks per year. So that's more pollution in areas where they're already suffering from too much pollution. So one of my biggest complaints is that people need a fair shot. You cannot dump all the pollution in one place. And we see this a lot with the industry. For example, we had done a rapid health impact assessment in Millsboro. And within 2 miles, like these folks were living next to a power plant, a poultry processing plant, asphalt, 2 Superfund sites, 1 Browns field, spray fields, Merck Pharmaceutical. Like, how much pollution is fair for one community to absorb, right? That cumulative impact of the pollution is horrendous. And as you said, what we're seeing around the country with these, I've talked to many people, even outside the country, is that this doesn't seem to be the answer. We're seeing that they are trying to put many of these in.
There's the Bioenergy DevCo project in Seaford, Delaware, and then the company Clean Bay Renewables is also constructing large-scale poultry waste-based biogas in Delmarva, one in Sussex County and one in Somerset County, that will each receive more than 150,000 tons of poultry waste every year. Clean Bay Renewables has received a $1.4 million grant from MDA and $15 million from the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund from the Maryland DNR, which is mostly state money, so taxpayer money. On a happier note, Monica Brooks, who you've heard from in previous episodes, did tell me that she and the Wicomico NAACP were a part of blocking 2 biogas plants in the county. Back to Maria and the Seaford plant.
Half of them are not up and running. They're not working properly. And then what we see is, because you are taking the waste to create another product, that it's actually expanding the problem we started out in the beginning, which was getting rid of the waste, right? So it doesn't seem too well thought out. We see a lot of Band-Aids all the time. This one really worries me, because we're talking about normally 20-year contracts. We've seen a lot of things being proposed to try to clean up the waterways, and they haven't been working. So I'm a little concerned about this.
Right. And the biogas plants, they're supposed to collect the methane gas that comes off of the waste, but then they kind of advertise that as a sustainable solution. But
right.
At the same time,
and they're flaring it on the neighbors, right? It's coming out, they're flaring it on the neighbors. It's going into either pipelines or being trucked. So you're talking about more pollution that way. There is a byproduct, although when they tried to bring the facility in and sell it to the public, it was sold as they actually used the waterways, the quality of the waterways, to try to get it in and say, this is going to take the farmer's litter and it's going to protect our waterways from the pollution. Well, when the application, actually hit the state agency, that's where the rubber hits the road, right? Because you see the things on paper. It was only, I think, 17% was broiler litter. The other larger and greater percent was processing plant waste.
And when these facilities are described as converting waste to energy, it makes it seem like just energy is the end result, like the waste is gone. But after the gas gets collected and is sold, there's wastewater and solid waste, called digestate, left behind. The digestate will have nitrogen and phosphorus and other chemicals originally in the waste, and it'll be spread onto fields as fertilizer, just as the processing plants and chicken operations already do. As for air pollution, the plants leak 2 to 4% of their methane, and in some cases up to 15%, and they emit ammonia, VOCs, nitrous oxides, sulfur oxide, and particulate matter. Methane is a greenhouse gas that's more powerful at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. MIT's Climate Portal explains that if a factory releases methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, then immediately that methane is going to trap at least 100 times more heat than the CO2, and about 28 times more heat than the CO2 over 100 years. And remember, chicken litter is dry and can break down aerobically, so methane emissions are really only relevant when the litter is purposefully mixed with water in a digester or maybe a lagoon. And then there's the air pollution from the estimated 73,000 truck trips per year to and from the Seaford plant. As for wastewater, the Seaford plant will generate a max of 60,000 gallons of wastewater per day. At the time of permitting, the plan was to bring the wastewater to the Sussex Wastewater Treatment Plant, which treats water and discharges into the Nanticoke River. But at that point, the county had only agreed to up to 30,000 gallons per day to be taken to a lagoon and sprayed at the Bridgefield Spray Irrigation Site, a site that is set to shut down. Safety is also a concern, as in a study of 13,171 biogas plants in Europe, there were more than 800 accidents. And finally, the forest directly next to the plant is designated as a key wildlife habitat by the Delaware Wildlife Action Plan. For Rebecca, the whole biogas situation is especially ridiculous when it comes to chicken waste.
Poultry litter, which is the manure and the bedding from poultry CAFOs, doesn't actually produce methane in its industrial form. It's dry. It releases air pollutants like particulate matter that are a disaster for lung health, but it doesn't produce methane. So when we're talking about poultry industry digesters, we're actually talking about liquefying it or using generally what the industry talks about to liquefy that waste and make it digest and make gases, create gases to go into natural gas pipelines, is using sludge from the slaughter process as the liquid effluent that is now then going to create the gases that then they're going to quote unquote harvest and inject in pipelines. So you're just talking about industrial disaster all over. We're talking about the poultry industry waste problem, both on farm and then from the processing facility. But you're also now talking about pipelines through communities, or if they're not going to build a pipeline, they're also talking about trucking this stuff. So now you've got a few rural roads and trucks that are full of explosive methane gas. It's just wild. And all under the guise of a climate solution when poultry litter doesn't even, in its industrial form, doesn't even produce methane on its own. I think particularly with the chicken industry, it is just a climate scheme. It's just a way to deregulate the waste industry and pass it off as agricultural. I think industry really is like, look at us, look at this magic solution where we're going to take waste and turn it into clean, shiny, wonderful, renewable gas. In reality, we're talking about concentrating all of this waste in a community and then having a liquid, solid, and gas stream created by all of this excess waste. We already have excess waste on the shore from the industry, and now we're talking about bringing in even more to feed this digester that once you build it, it's very expensive. You got to keep feeding it, otherwise it doesn't work. So now we've created basically this digester that needs to be fed, and it needs to keep eating, and we need to keep bringing in waste to feed it, and then we have to deal with what comes out of it as well. And who's benefiting? It's just the industry.
On December 22, 2022, a civil rights complaint was filed against Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, DNREC, and Sussex County for discriminating against the community living around the proposed biogas plant. The complaint, signed and submitted by representatives from the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, including Maria and Rachel, the Sussex Health and Environmental Network, the Delaware State Conference of Branches of the NAACP, the Delaware Poor People's Campaign, and the ACLU Delaware, explains that they failed to provide info on the facility's additional pollution burdens, existing pollution levels, the public's rights, public participation opportunities, notice of the permit application, public hearings in languages other than English or interpretation or translation services, and public notice and participation opportunities to people with limited English proficiency and without technology access. And the complaint outlines that these failures had a disproportionate and discriminatory effect on the communities close to the facility, who are majority Black, Latino, Hispanic, speak Spanish or Creole, and are majority low income and already surrounded by pollution and industrial sites. Maria is credited in the complaint for being the reason the public got notified about the project in the first place, because she noticed it under an item called Other Business while reading Sussex County Planning and Zoning Commission agendas in June of 2020. It was placed on an agenda for approval, trying to skirt the public process. DENREC also refused requests to hold a public information meeting at a mobile home park nearest the facility that's home to many Haitian community members, and did not meet with the community at large in person. Here's Gabby, who you heard from in previous episodes.
The Bioenergy DevCo facility is horrendous. I mean, they took the old pelletizing plant from Purdue. They literally just bulldozed their way to getting this facility done. And it's in a rural residential neighborhood. Nobody there wanted to talk about it. Nobody really wanted to stand up and fight against it because they were afraid. And they knew that they were going up against a monster. I mean, there's people that live like almost right next door to it. And I hope that hopefully we can get some air monitoring data and research done. But when Maria and I attended the hearings and stuff for that, I mean, it was very stressful, but it was also one of the worst forms of like government. I'm trying to find the right word for this. It was, let's just say, like, the government tried very hard to reduce the community's ability to speak out against the proposed facility at the time. They actively refused to acknowledge that there were language barriers in that area. There's a lot of Latino communities that speak Spanish, but there's also a lot of Haitian community members that live in that area. And Maria and I worked very hard to try to get like translators. We went into the communities, we went and talked to them at their churches, at their community events, about what was being proposed. And like DENREC actively refused to engage with the communities until we filed a Title VI complaint for civil rights. And, you know, again, same thing with the Mount Air in Millsboro lawsuit. It all just got swept under the rug. There's still people that have lived here their entire lives that don't know anything about that Millsboro case, which is insane because it went on for years. I mean, there are people that lost their family members. There's people that lost their babies. And again, it's like, there's not a lot of people that are willing to talk about those issues anymore. And like, then you have media companies around here that are actively sweeping this stuff under the rug.
About a half mile from the Seaford plant is a mobile home park, with another one close by. Within 1 mile, residents are in the 91st percentile nationally for how close they live exposed to Superfund sites. Within 3 miles away is the town of Blades, which is a Superfund site because of PFAS contamination in the drinking water. And within 5 miles are additional Superfund sites, brownfields, an alum harim facility, a chemicals corporation, and other industrial sites. According to the Bioenergy DevCo hearing presentation from 2022, within 1 mile of the plant, there were already 62 chicken houses. By the way, Superfund sites are places that have been so polluted that they are eligible for federally funded cleanup by the EPA. It's also worth noting that when the biogas project was permitted, biogas facilities were not allowed in agricultural, residential zoning, which is where the Seaford plant is located. So the EPA accepted the civil rights complaint on September 8th, 2023, and in January of 2025, the EPA responded with an informal resolution agreement for DNREC to work on the issues brought up in the complaint. While the EPA's decision did not bring Seaford residents justice, the Title VI complaint did incentivize DNREC to create an environmental justice coordinator position, an environmental justice policy and screening tool, and some other improvements, but none of them included reconsidering the facility's permits.
I would like to say that we have a great person now who is working at our state agency that's an environmental justice coordinator and seems to be very concerned about justice. I will say that we now have public notices going out in areas where there is isolated languages in Spanish and in Creole. So there have been some positives from some of the work, but this is not the answer. We really need something that's not being subsidized by the taxpayer that is going to cause some public health problems, right, with the people where it's being hosted again. And again, you have that byproduct that has to go back on the fields. So what are we doing?
Right.
It just doesn't go away.
Yeah, and it maintains not only fossil fuel infrastructure, but then it also maintains the industrial ag infrastructure.
Exactly.
So how does a biogas plant maintain fossil fuel infrastructure? Well, BTS Bioenergy will sell that gas to Chesapeake Utilities, who will further process it and then pump it into their gas pipeline, selling it to customers as a product with quite the greenwashed name, Renewable Natural Gas, or RNG for short.
And that's kind of where the much bigger issue comes into play, is that when we didn't know it, but the industry and the gas industry were creating one of the biggest pipelines that anyone has ever seen in a very long time.
Gabby's referring here to the Delmarva region.
And what they were doing is they were using the railroad right-of-way to avoid state and county scrutiny and also environmental regulations. So a lot of it now is like, when you look at these maps, you can see they're following Route 13, they're following Route 1, they're bypassing all of this public scrutiny in order to build these massive methane pipelines. It's crazy. And, Maria and I always say, like, follow the money. Follow the money. Where is the money going?
Chesapeake Utilities' subsidiary Eastern Shore Natural Gas has been working on expanding the pipeline through Delmarva to big customers like the University of Maryland Eastern Shore and the prison Eastern Correctional Institution. In a press release from February 26, 2018, Chesapeake Utilities announced, quote, Chesapeake Utilities Corporation commits to further expansion of natural gas services throughout the Delmarva Peninsula and surrounding region, end quote. Since then, beside the pipeline expansion, they've set up their subsidiary Marlin Gas to truck the RNG, partnered with Clean Bay Renewables, acquired Planet Found Energy Development, which had a biogas plant on site in Somerset County, invested in an LNG storage facility in Worcester County and a gas compressor in Sussex County, and I bet there's more. Back when the biogas plant in Seaford was trying to get its permits, the VP of Chesapeake Utilities wrote in a letter of support, saying, quote, our goal is to support a carbon-neutral future. A proven means to achieve this goal requires the introduction of renewable natural gas, RNG, into our natural gas system, end quote. Similarly, Purdue Farms' Vice President of Environmental Sustainability and Government Relations, which I gotta point out is just a strange title, wrote that the biogas plant will, quote, create renewable energy and help manage poultry processing, hatchery, and litter outputs in an environmentally sustainable manner, end quote. Purdue also has partnered with a company in other states called Green Gas USA that produces RNG. I want to highlight the chosen language in the greenwashing. I'm curious what your perspective on the strategy behind this language is, and what's the impact of using language like this
Does it have an impact? And then the last piece would be, what would you rather the term be?
We have been up against that greenwashing because it sounds so win-win-win. When in reality, when you take a look at what is happening there, the only one who is winning is the industry. But now we've got big ag and big oil kind of teamed up in this. And so we're really up against some big foes here that have truly teamed up to sell us a greenwashed lie in this kind of sanitized renewable natural gas. But it's methane. There's nothing clean or green or even renewable about it. It's from a waste stream. And pollution by any name is what this dirty tech really is. And so we've decided to call it factory farm gas. We are pointing toward where it comes from, who it's benefiting, and the impacts that it is having on communities. Again, with those gas trucks, with bringing more waste into community. And I think by tying those two together and showing actually where it's coming from and who it's benefiting, we can tell that story that factory farm gas is a dirty, dead end.
I'll call biogas that's from animal waste factory farm gas for the rest of the episode.
We know we need to be moving away from both factory farms and from oil and gas. And that digesters and factory farm gas actually props up both of these industries that we know that family farmers, that workers, the community members who live nearby, rural communities that know that they're exploiting communities. And so I think naming it factory farm gas shows that this technology, these proposals really traps us in dead end toxic factory farm pathways that we know we need to move away from. So I think naming it what it is and not this kind of greenwashed label that the industry likes to use is really helpful for just showing that.
Yeah, it reminds me of the saying fracked gas instead of
exactly
natural gas.
Same idea. And honestly, I've been part of some of those conversations early on, and we were thinking, this is the same bridge fuel lie that we were sold 15, 20 years ago. It's the same type of thought process, and we know better. There's no sane reason to entrust our future to these industries that have harmed us for so long. And we need to call it like it is and be forward thinking about the communities and the systems that we want to build.
Over the last several years, factory farm gas has found a home in climate policy. The last person I'd like to introduce you to is Tyler Lobdell. He's a staff attorney at Food and Water Watch, worked alongside Delmarva organizers to oppose the Seaford facility getting its permits, and can explain the bigger picture of the ag and fossil fuel industry's accelerated interest in factory farm gas and misuse of climate policy.
This really comes out of this new trend to monetize factory farm pollution in different ways. And the reason why that has been a game changer is sort of because of the degree to which that monetization is happening, or to the degree to which these incentive structures are being set up for the creation and then capture of particular pollutants from factory farm operations. And with respect to anaerobic digesters, that's sort of the key feature, because these are very expensive and very complicated pieces of infrastructure. And so while digesters have been around for decades as sort of a management option for most of these types of operations, we're most focused on large factory farms, the economics just wasn't there to make money off of it, right? It was always there as an option for intentionally produced methane emissions, but sort of the profit stream wasn't there, and so folks weren't adopting it. We now see things like the low carbon fuel standard and the renewable fuel standard at the federal level, and then sort of a slew of other federal, state, and local incentives that all put together not only make these kinds of projects financially viable, but make them extremely lucrative. One of the things we've seen happen here is the vast over-incentivization. Because typically when you see policies like this, the rationale is we want to incentivize to make things possible not to just wantonly enrich private actors on the public dime. And that's exactly what happens here, or is happening here, because there's so many layers of incentives that any reasonable requirement for financial stability is far exceeded by the profit margins that these type of projects can bring in now. So that's kind of why we're seeing Chevron and BMW and Amazon, these enormous multinational corporations wanting to get in on this now.
In January of 2024, Food and Water Watch reported that, quote, private investment in factory farm gas tripled since 2017, rising to over $1.6 billion, end quote. Chevron, BP, Shell, and others have all invested billions of dollars into farm gas development. Currently, most working farm gas operations are on site at large dairy CAFOs and collect gas from their lagoons of manure. But building a digester is capital intensive, and to build one that gets the gas off site is millions of dollars and requires huge amounts of waste to break profits and to sell to the energy grid. So these operations are really just for the largest CAFOs, the biggest meat producers, and the fossil fuel companies they partner with. In terms of the incentives, the policies are often called pollution trading policies. Is that correct? Are those the policies you're talking about? And can you kind of explain what that name means and who uses it, maybe who doesn't, a little bit too?
Sure, it is one of the
Okay.
buckets of incentives that are really important. It very well may be one of the largest, or it historically over the past 5 or 6 years, it has been the largest. So pollution trading, in a nutshell, is the idea that one actor, let's say a factory, has a legal requirement to emit only a certain amount of a pollutant. So they have some cap on what they can pollute. And a policy is put into place where instead of just reducing their pollution at that factory, some other actor can do something somewhere else that has environmental benefit. And that environmental benefit is then transformed into a credit, into this tradable mechanism, this sort of financial tool. And then that attribute, that environmental benefit, gets sold, and that other actor who had this legal mandate can just buy that attribute instead of simply polluting less at their facility. And so proponents of this, typically in industry and industry-friendly policymakers, will argue that these types of schemes are efficient, that they allow the markets to seek out the lowest cost mitigation options and then allow the overall sort of ecosystem of the economy and the different sectors, to reach good results at a lower cost. The problem is that in practice, and I've been looking at a lot of these over the past several years, essentially universally, they become really problematic in terms of how the programs actually operate. They get rife with grift and fraud and illusory credit trading, where whatever environmental benefit is supposedly being sold is either trumped up or, really has no basis to begin with, or it was environmentally harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And so this attitude that we can achieve environmental sustainability or that we can protect the environment through profit motive doesn't bear out in reality. And it results in broken policies and programs that serve polluters more than people who most of these programs were in some way intended to protect at the beginning of the day. And they've sort of been warped into these industry-friendly slush funds. And so that's pollution trading in a nutshell. It's one of these things that kind of sounds like a reasonable idea on paper, and then you see it in practice, and it's just really dysfunctional policy almost everywhere it's used.
This type of policy concerning pollution trading, especially when something like factory farm gas gets counted as a credit, demonstrates how the state is willing to amplify inequalities and the deterioration of human and ecosystem health over passing policies that actually reduce pollution and move away from extractive systems. The state and these industries are accelerating climate change together in the name of profit.
So the low carbon fuel standard in California is a transportation sector focused pollution trading scheme. And essentially what it attempts to do is lower the overall climate intensity, or like how much climate damage is coming from California's entire transportation sector. And it does that by limiting what the fossil fuel producers can emit or what their carbon intensity is for all the fuels that they sell in the state of California. It allows alternative fuels to be produced, brought into California, and then they create these credits that the big oil companies like Chevron or whatever can purchase to meet their legal obligations. And that program, when it was first implemented in 2009, was novel and was sort of the first of its kind in the United States, and has since become sort of a model for other states to adopt similar approaches. So at this point, California, Oregon, and Washington State all have a clean transportation program following this general model. New Mexico is in the process of developing a somewhat similar program. And so we see this conversation happening in state legislatures all over the country. In my opinion, why it's spreading around the country is because the low carbon fuel standard has been co-opted by industry and has become exceptionally lucrative for some of the biggest polluters in our economy. And so they are pushing to have this program put all around the country because it's just more opportunities for them to profiteer off of a program like this. And so that's why there's this attention everywhere now, is because industry is like, wow, where there's so much money in this, why limit ourselves to California? Let's get this policy in place throughout the country.
Right. Could you explain a little bit about why it's so lucrative for these industries?
It's a really important question because what I'm about to describe was not always a problem. So it comes down to what's called avoided methane crediting. And in the low carbon fuel standard, factory farm gas, so this pollution created from waste at factory farms that emits methane once a factory farm liquefies and manages that waste in a certain way. That wasn't massively incentivized under the low carbon fuel standard for many years, and had a rational sort of accounting of its climate impacts. And because of that, it was an alternative fuel, and producers certainly could participate in the low carbon fuel standard and generate credits. They would just be sort of on par with other alternative fuels. So it's sort of a rational fit into the program. In 2017, they changed that and they adopted this avoided methane crediting. And what this does is it assumes that factory farms will will emit as much pollution as possible. And we're specifically talking about methane here, but it assumes that factory farms are free to and will in fact go out and produce as much methane pollution as they possibly can. And it treats that as sort of your starting point. And then pays factory farms to do anything other than that through the act of capture. So through capturing those emissions. And so what they're doing is they assume a worst case scenario, or they assume a bad actor scenario. And that allows the industry to, in a way, endlessly produce more credits to sell into this program, because there are no guardrails for how bad an actor they can be. So I'll give you some concrete examples. A factory farm can just simply increase the size of their herd. They can just bring on more animals, whether or not they need food or fiber from those animals for food or fiber markets, but just for their manure. Because if they get more manure, they can flush it into these management systems that generate methane. And then the low carbon fuel standard will pay them lavishly to mitigate a portion of that intentionally produced pollution. So it's sort of like a one-way ratchet where the profiteering side of it is kind of bottomless. Like you can just sort of go out and pollute as much as you possibly can with no limit, and you get paid every step of the way, and you get paid more the more you pollute. And because factory farms have been wildly unregulated and frankly operate as bad neighbors and bad actors as a business model, they are positioned to massively profit off of that type of a scheme, because their general baseline is cheap and dirty. And so they get assigned these credit generating accounting numbers, it's called carbon intensity, that are 7-fold more powerful in terms of generating money than any other type of fuel humans have ever conceived of.
Wow.
And that's another way to, the way this ultimately works in practice is avoided methane crediting is on paper the most effective climate mitigation idea humanity has ever come up with and probably could ever come up with. It's bogus. It's an accounting trick. But on paper, it looks like you are reversing climate change.
When you're not.
By capturing,
Yep.
by burning methane in compressed natural gas trucks, by emitting CO2. The accounting books make it look like you are reversing climate change. And so because of that scheme, because it's a one-way ratchet with really no bottom to just how deep the profiteering can go, and the fact that you have an industry spread around the country that's already such a bad actor, there's just enormous money to be made. And it's entirely unique to the factory farm industry. So the other major sources of methane emissions in our country, the oil and gas sector and organic waste, so landfills, do not get this same treatment because they're actually regulated. And so their ability to generate credits are wildly less than factory farms. So this one type of fuel, this one especially bad actor industry, is positioned to make money from these types of programs in a way that no one else is, and that frankly the policymakers who created the LCFS never would have countenanced. Industry, again, has been able to co-opt this program cleverly to the point where it's now become a polluter's paradise as opposed to a climate policy that makes any sense.
Right. Because, yeah, it's upheld as a waste solution and a climate solution when it's making more waste and it's worse for the climate. Is there anything else you think would be important for people to know, kind of just learning about this stuff before we go on to the other buckets?
I mean, just that the low carbon fuel standard out of California is not limited to California. And that's another feature of these programs. So any factory farm in the country hypothetically can participate or can generate low carbon fuel standard credits that it then sells into the state of California. I guess I just want to elevate that because I work on this so often. I'm working with folks in Michigan and New York State and Iowa, really all around the country, who are seeing these massive digester projects being proposed. And the business model is, we're going to make money off the low carbon fuel standard. And they're like, hold on, what? Like, why am I fighting a polluting project in my community in central Illinois or whatever? And their business model is based on a climate program in California. And so just understanding that what happens in California is directly impacting sort of everyone else who is already dealing with high concentrations of these types of facilities. Another huge problem with how these particular programs are running is it allows operators to double dip on a variety of different programs. And so essentially what we're facing here is a situation where a bunch of different states have these programs, and the same facility, the same mega dairy in Oregon or the same mega feedlot in Texas is making money off 6 different states' programs, all for the exact same, methane capture, all for the same conduct, the exact same mitigation. So it just ups the gamesmanship, and it ups the opportunities for corruption and fraud and just dysfunctional policy, as we see more and more programs, all of which want all of these extra jurisdictional projects to be part of their program.
Maryland has the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which has a requirement for Maryland utilities to purchase renewable energy credits to represent 50% of the energy that they sell by 2030. Factory farm gas, described as poultry litter to energy, is approved as a renewable energy credit on the same tier as solar and wind energy. So farm gas plants that don't even have to be in Maryland get money when their credits are bought. What are the other buckets that are helping this rise in farm gas digesters?
There are these trading schemes that we've been talking about, and there's also just direct incentives. So, for example, in Maryland, I understand that there are direct grants that have been given to digester projects, possibly the same in Delaware. For the bioenergy DevCo project, we confronted tax-exempt bonds that were issued to the project developers to cover the financing. That may not seem like a lot, but what that does is it deprives the local tax base of what it would otherwise have gotten from a huge project. A project that billed itself, frankly, as good for the economics of the local community, while getting tax breaks to not have to pay their fair share.
In Maryland, factory farm gas plants can also get money from the Maryland Animal Waste Technology Fund, which has given millions of dollars to finance factory farm gas plants on the Eastern Shore.
Another sort of big part of it are tax incentives other than bonds, right? So the federal government passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which has all these different sections which create tax incentives for these types of projects. Like the very minute details are still kind of getting worked out. And the future of that program in general, I think, is a little bit questionable right now with the change in administration. But, the IRA is a huge bucket of money that could be available for projects like this.
The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, even increased the energy incentive tax credit given to factory farm gas operators if they're located in, quote, high energy areas, end quote, meaning places that already have polluting infrastructure, like the location of the BTS bioenergy plant in Delaware. From 2022 to 2023, the USDA's Rural Energy for America program increased grants for biogas by about 2,600%. And these funds are still coming. On July 4th, 2025, the American Biogas Council published a press release titled, American Biogas Council Applauds Biogas Provisions as President Trump Signs One Big Beautiful Bill Act. One thing to note here, because I'm not sure if I have already, is that jobs in the state and these industries tend to be revolving doors, especially for the people high up enough to make decisions. One well-known example was Tom Vilsack, who was the Secretary of Ag for Obama and Biden. He made millions when working for animal ag lobbying groups when not in government. And yes, he's been a significant advocate for factory farm gas.
The takeaway is just that there are a lot of different ways that our policymakers are encouraging and incentivizing and, making projects like this cheaper for developers. Even when the developer is a billion-dollar multinational company. In Michigan, I believe it was like $200 million in tax-exempt bonds were just issued to a project, backed by Chevron. So these are not like, upstart companies
Right.
that need this financing. These are some of the most wealthy companies on planet Earth who are getting tax breaks to bring more pollution into the communities who are getting the hit for that tax, right?
And while you mentioned Chevron, I'd like to also underscore just the role of the fossil fuel industry with these policies. In your experience, what have you found about that you think is important to share?
Yeah, I mean, the fossil fuel industry loves this particular aspect of climate mitigation, this factory farm gas dynamic, because it really allows them to continue business as usual, and all I have to do is buy credits, right? Like their world, their ideal world is that every factory farm in the United States has a digester on it. It's producing some sort of tradable credit, and that the fossil fuel industry never has to produce a gallon less of fossil fuels, because they'll be able to comply with whatever requirement may ever come down the pike simply by buying credits, these very powerful, sort of bizarrely powerful credits from factory farms. And so, and to be clear, there's no universe, and everyone agrees on this, including the industry folks, there's no universe in which renewable natural gas, so non-fossil based natural gas, is a meaningful part of our overall gas system. Will never happen at our current consumption rates. We could be tapping every source of RNG in the country to its maximum potential, and we would be at less than 15% current consumption, significantly less than that.
A study of RNG potential in Minnesota found that RNG from landfills, wastewater treatment plants, and dairy and hog farms, so not just RNG from factory farm gas, could only replace about 7.5% of the state's natural gas use, and that, quote, no projects are financially feasible without state or federal renewable fuel credit programs because direct sale of RNG alone does not cover project costs, end quote.
So this is not a conversation about using fossil natural gas or not. It's about how are we going to greenwash the existing natural gas system or not. So that's really what the conversation is about. So from the fossil fuel perspective, there was a leaked presentation from among natural gas industry folks from a few years ago. And the PowerPoint slide essentially, it had a bullet, and it was, quote, RNG is our savior, end quote. Like they get this. They get that society is not going to accept the destruction of our shared life support system for a whole lot longer. And so they see this as an opportunity to convince the public that actually fossil natural gas is no problem because we're climate neutral. We're net zero because we bought a bunch of credits from massive factory farms. And so this works really, really well for them. And the low carbon fuel standard is kind of in California is kind of an interesting microcosm because the fossil fuel industry has a lot of issues with that program. They have a lot of gripes with that program. They actually went out of their way to kind of fight the most recent changes to that program, some of them, but they love this part of the low carbon fuel standard. That's why they're out there investing in these projects and applying for pathways in the LCFS to generate their own credits to essentially sell to themselves from these factory farms.
For example, Dominion Energy partnered with Smithfield Foods, the world's biggest pork producer, to spend $500 million on converting hog waste to energy in North Carolina, and plans to get to what they call carbon neutrality for 96% of its gas operations by injecting just 4% of renewable natural gas into its pipelines. In 2021, BP, aka British Petroleum, announced a 15-year partnership with Clean Bay Renewables to sell their chicken waste-produced RNG to BP. BP now has a VP of biogas origination, Michael Thomas, and he's quoted on their website saying, quote, "Working with innovative companies like Clean Bay will be key for BP to reach our net zero ambition," end quote. Net zero, by the way, signals the use of pollution trading schemes, allowing companies to not actually or meaningfully reduce their own greenhouse gases.
So it's one of these odd places where you actually have the industry promoting this particular policy. And for folks like me, that's a red flag. Like, we are used to industry being tooth and nail against anything that might affect them negatively, their bottom line, or require them to be better stewards of the environment. And so that they're so eager and enthusiastic about this type of supposed mitigation, is a red flag, and unfortunately bears out on research and inspection that this is a big problem, and industry likes it because it greases the wheels for them to greenwash themselves and to comply with whatever climate mandates may come down in the future with simple credit trading. And they can just continue business as usual.
I kind of want to understand how this is moving into the poultry industry, because we know too that poultry litter made out of CAFO needs to be liquefied in order to put into these facilities. And so in the poultry world, a lot of the waste that's going there, from what I've learned so far, is from the processing plants because there's more wastewater already coming out of them. But how have you seen the poultry industry also take hold of this opportunity to have more digesters?
Yeah, it's especially bizarre because the poultry industry is uniquely not, it is not a good source of what's called feedstock for anaerobic digestion. There's all sorts of problems with poultry litter and anaerobic digestion. So it is bizarre in just the technical sense of it. Where it makes perfect sense is all the profiteering we were all just talking about. This industry wants in on the slush fund. And it's actually not all that different from what we're seeing happen in livestock sectors, because we're seeing what were dry lot, they're called dry lot facilities at feedlots for beef or dairies, where they weren't liquefying their manure before. There were other ways to manage their manure, which didn't have these methane emissions. And they're actually transitioning over to lagoons and liquid manure management so that they can have methane emissions, so that they can start participating in all these incentives. So that's essentially what you just described the poultry industry doing. It's far more universal in the poultry industry. Like, nobody was just really out there using lagoons. And so it's sort of wholesale sort of transition and a little bit more egregious and sort of on the nose. But the same dynamic, the same rationale is pervading both hog and livestock production with respect to biogas as well. So same mentality, right? Mm-hmm. How do I maximize my methane pollution so that I can get paid for it? And shockingly and offensively, the US EPA has sort of long promoted this. If you go to their website, it's called AgStar. I'm sure you've been on it. It's like the EPA's program to promote digesters. They, at least last I looked, this was several months ago, had a page about the poultry industry. And it straight up says, hey, you should go liquefy your manure and produce biogas. You don't have any methane problem right now. but you can make money off this stuff. And hey, you should go get food waste and co-digest it with your poultry litter, because that's going to increase your methane production and you'll get more credits for it.
AgStar still has that page on poultry. It's called Anaerobic Digestion on Poultry Farms. And it says, quote, operators may store liquid or slurry poultry manure in anaerobic lagoons, earthen structures which look like farm ponds. For poultry operations, anaerobic lagoons are commonly used for layers in the South and Central U.S., often on operations that include egg washing. Anaerobic lagoons produce much more methane than dry manure management systems, end quote. The AgStar main page also has a link to a database of state incentives for renewable energy to demonstrate the widely available loans and subsidies for digesters.
So it's really not shy about it. It really is go pollute more so that you can get paid for it. And the only reason the poultry industry hasn't been more aggressive at adopting it, in my opinion, is because of the technical barriers. Their waste stream is just, frankly, not a suitable waste stream for anaerobic digestion, but they're trying their darndest to overcome that.
In January of 2025, the American Biogas Council celebrated the German company Envitec Biogas AG for their chicken-based biogas work with poultry, and the fact that, quote, market potential for chicken manure in the U.S. is so significant that combined with Envitec's extensive expertise in processing this specialized feedstock, several projects are already in the planning stages, end quote. Disappointingly, 3 environmental groups based in Delmarva wrote letters in support of the factory farm gas plant in Seaford: Wicomico Environmental Trust, Delaware Center for Inland Bays, and Friends of the Nanticoke River. Based on their letters, they believe that the farm gas plant will decrease the amount of poultry waste in Delmarva and that the RNG will replace fracked gas in the pipelines and so be good for climate change. Meanwhile, the gas industry's own research shows that RNG can only replace a small percentage of fracked gas, and these factory farm gas plants launder in expansion of a fracked gas energy grid across Delmarva and the expansion of bigger and bigger chicken operations. These large-scale poultry waste-based gas plants actually lock us into fossil fuels and industrialized animal food production for longer, creating more waste and worsening climate change in the long term. Environmental groups willingly greenwashing polluters and not standing up for environmental justice for people and places being sacrificed by these systems of pollution, and not advocating for systems change needed for dealing with climate change is, while incredibly upsetting, nothing new for many environmental groups and does make the problems they claim to care about worse. Here's Monica Brooks, the organizer and president of the Wicomico County branch of the NAACP, who you heard from in previous episodes, on her summary of the farm gas and RNG situation.
The problem is we allow, because an industry provides money and then they'll provide sponsorship, then that means that they can just do whatever they want. That's the message that people send when you don't hold them accountable, when you don't say, okay, you're going to do this. So how is this going to affect this? How is this going to affect that? What is it going to do to the community? What is the potential for fallout? So this kind of stuff, this bio, energy, gas, all of these different things are just another way to prevent the industry from being accountable for what they're doing to the environment. So, for example, you have all of these mega chickens, you got all this extra manure, what'd you gonna do with it? You can't put it out here on the land anymore because we have way too many nitrates here on the Eastern Shore because it's just too much. It was not meant to be that.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we do? Oh, well, instead of cutting back and doing things more sustainably, no, what we'll do is we can tell you it's energy. We can sell it as energy. Okay. Just so that we can continue to scale up, scale up, scale up. It is sold as a positive, but it is not a positive, especially when you consider where it all comes from and how this gets worse and worse because you're creating more and more and more. And instead of not doing that, You're trying to sell us a bill of goods as to why we can turn it into this and make it into something amazing. And guess what, guys? It is not going to provide any harm to you, to your water, to your air. And that's a lie. That's bogus. The harm that it's already causing to the environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that part is the part they still refuse to acknowledge. The particulate matter, the ammonia that comes out and goes to the air, which is a sticky gas, sticks to whatever it gets to. So you breathe it in, stuck to your lungs. So they don't want to talk about those things. They just want to talk about shiny object. Hey guys, we're providing a service that is positive, and we're going to help make the world a greener space. But if you snatch the curtain down, you see what's really going on, which are all these CAFOs.
And greenwashing these projects is not only misleading, but it also delays meaningful climate action, which is needed to protect people's lives and the lives of our fellow animals, plants, waters, and soils.
We're in a basin. And so climate change is a huge piece, which I didn't bring up earlier, just how negatively industrial agriculture affects climate change and how we are at high risk for this overabundance of this industrialized model.
Industrial animal food production is a big contributor to climate change. Industrialized animal ag emits greenhouse gases like methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and requires large amounts of energy to run the feed mills, the hatcheries, the CAFOs, the processing plants, and the trucks, ships, and planes that transport their products. In the U.S., direct emissions from agriculture are estimated to be about 10 to 11% of the country's total GHG emissions, and animal agriculture is estimated to generate about 36% of the U.S.'s methane emissions. Globally, animal ag is responsible for about 14.5% of people's GHG emissions, which is about the same as transportation-related activities. The animal ag industry, by the way, lobbied to get the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, to remove a recommendation to reduce meat consumption with plant-based diets.
The sooner that we can get our legislators to listen and take note and demand change and put measures in place to protect, everyone. You can't start this stuff all after the fact. We're already in crisis. Even our temperatures, and everyone sees it across the board. People are, oh, it's always been this hot. No, it has not. But educating folks on the contributing factors to climate change is super imperative. And that is part of the work that we do too. I got to help testify for some bills on climate change. So the conversation is being had. It just has to be pushed and pushed harder because there's an urgency that we have that cannot be ignored any longer. And so, my hope is that we get to that place where we don't say, oh, that climate change, that's just a myth, or because we're in the country, we're in a rural area, it doesn't affect us. No, it's affecting all of us. And what is coming out of these industrial houses that these mega fans are pushing out into our air is highly contributing. The data is substantial. It is a huge cause for the rapid climate change. And we need to have a planet that is safe for the future generations. And that needs to be our focus. That's the whole basis of all of this. It's not just the clean air and clean water at this moment, because you can say, okay, well, we can do some filters, or we can do, put some water filters and do some air filters. Yes, sure. But we can't filter the climate. We cannot. And all of this is hindering our climate.
When I asked Kathy Phillips, the coastkeeper who you met in episode 3 about climate change, the first thing she thought of was Delmarva's soils.
because most of the peninsula is tied to the poultry industry, it's very dependent on corn and soybean production. And this monoculture kills our healthy soils. At some point, sea level rise, stormwater, storm surge inundation is going to begin to impact the industry. Saltwater intrusion is already impacting farmers who are trying to grow corn and especially soybeans. The saltwater intrusion into the groundwater is drying up fields, leaving huge salt deposits on fields, and trying to switch to something that might grow better in saltier soils, which could be done, is going to take a monstrous conversion because those soils are so dead already. This monoculture on the eastern shores that is only to support the poultry industry is actually exacerbating problems. But the greater threat is that climate change. Yes, the poultry industry can impact climate change, but climate change itself is impacting the industry. Again, farmers having a harder and harder time to grow the soybeans. We are drought prone more often, high heat temperatures. It's getting more and more difficult to grow the crops that have traditionally, to grow these two particular crops to feed the poultry industry. We're seeing lower soybean harvests and farmers now having to figure out what else to grow, that they can't grow the soybeans anymore. So that's, climate change is impacting the livelihoods of these farmers.
There's also flooding to think about because with warmer average temperatures comes increased precipitation. So we're seeing more frequent and intense storms from climate change, more flooding events.
Interestingly, if you look at NOAA's storm inundation maps and also go to FEMA's flood maps, you will notice as you enlarge and keep going more minute detail on these maps that they're called agricultural ditches. All of our fields on the eastern shore are intersected by these ditches, which help prevent flooding of the fields and carry water to the nearest body of water, whether it be a bay or a river or a stream. So you will see now that in the future, and not the far future, but the very near future, as we have larger storm events on the eastern shore, storm inundation comes up into these creeks, gets into these ditches, and actually carries the flooding problem further inland than if you didn't have those ditches. The ditches become a route for storm inundation and floodwaters to get further inland. And actually, Dave has access to these two, probably much easier than I can get to. One of his partners put together a map of Somerset County, especially, where the CAFOs were and how they were going to be impacted by floodwaters in the coming years with sea level rise and storm inundation. And you will see that there are a lot of poultry operations and farms that are going to be out of business in 15 to 20 years. We used those maps once at a Maryland discharge permit hearing when the discharge permit was being renewed. That's another thing that we tried over the years, was to get MDE to not allow the siting of these CAFOs in flood-prone areas. The permit does not talk about climate change at all, MDE ignores it. And so we printed them up on big poster board and took them to this one hearing that a lot of poultry farmers were attending also. And I put those up on display, and after the hearing was over, all these farmers were gathered around them and going, well, that's Jim's farm right there, and that's showing dark blue like it's going to be totally underwater, and hey, that's my farm. And they had never really paid attention to what the future is going to look like on Delmarva.
When chicken operations flood, The floodwaters can breach the sheds, pits, and lagoons storing the manure and waste. That means likely more contamination events into surface waters and pollutants seeping into groundwater.
Maryland Department of the Environment, Department of Natural Resources, our local county governments, they have got to accept that climate change is not only real, but it's already impacting our communities. Local governments, especially on the Lower Eastern Shore, need to adopt coastal resiliency planning and zoning into their zoning code. They need to start talking about climate change in their comprehensive plans. Because right now, Worcester County, its original comprehensive plan had a big section talking about climate change. And this was something that was made like 20 years ago, that was drafted 20 years ago. And I can tell you the county is getting ready to not even have that in the next renewal of the comprehensive plan. They don't want to look at that at all. They just want to know, how can we further develop Worcester County? Climate change has to be recognized in county comprehensive plans, and county and city and town infrastructure has to be improved to mitigate the increased flooding from stormwater runoff. They have to recognize that these agricultural ditches, they're also nicknamed tax ditches, they are point sources to our bays for polluted water. And you might as well just have a big pipe going straight out to Chincoteague Bay off of the Lower Eastern Shore, or out to Pocomoke Sound on the Lower Eastern Shore with these ditches. And they've got to be recognized that they're a problem. And how do you mitigate that problem? I'm certain that Purdue and everybody else is well aware that this is not going to be the best production area for them in the very near future. What their plans are, I don't know. The poultry industry and farming in general, at some point in time, is going to change drastically for the Lower Eastern Shore. What crops we grow, where we put farms, and I just don't see the chicken industry lasting another 50 years here on Delmarva.
For my research and interviews on the broiler industry in Delmarva, I've learned that large-scale industrial animal agriculture abuses farm workers and plant line workers, subjecting people to some of the highest rates of chronic illnesses and injuries across occupations, and exposes people living near its factory farms and plants to toxins that lead to illness and can end people's lives, like in the case of the Mount Air processing plant in Millsboro. I've learned how it's so capital intensive to profit as a contract chicken farmer in this system that farmers are often forced onto debt treadmills, driving small-scale farms out of business. I've learned how this food system and its overproduction model degrades and destabilizes ecosystems, depletes oxygen levels needed for aquatic life, and worsens climate change while taking money from climate policies in order to double down on large-scale production alongside the gas industry. I've learned that the chicken industry buys and bribes policymakers and has an influence on Delmarva state governments such that environmental and agriculture agencies are often found to be protecting the big integrators, not the public, despite many people's belief on the contrary. I've learned that the chicken industry has developed all of this technology dedicated to killing as many animals as possible as fast as possible, not actually with the goal of feeding the most people, but rather for profit accumulation as designed by the megacorporations monopolizing the industry and the state. It's a food system that disregards care for people, animals, and the present and long-term well-being of Earth. And the expansion of habitat destruction and land grabbing to grow crops in massive monocultures to feed higher and higher quantities of animals cruelly confined in CAFOs goes way beyond chickens and way beyond Delmarva. Because of how these industries develop under capitalism, This agriculture system has become a global problem that the Donnie Kings, Ronald Camerons, Larry Hogans, Brooke Rollinses, and Tom Vilsack's of the world don't want to slow down. They want us to head toward more and bigger CAFOs, more no-land farms, more factory farm gas plants, more sacrificed people and lands. While I've been putting together these episodes, the Trump administration has been trying to end protected status for Haitian immigrants, has massively increased ICE's budget to abduct and forcibly detain and deport people, and the USDA is allowing faster line speeds in poultry processing plants. Militarism, white supremacy, and corporate capture are interconnected and the foundations of this capitalist food system. So the takeaway for me is not just to reduce your personal meat consumption and boycott factory farm meat and monoculture veggies when you're able to, or if you're able to, or want to, but to see that, like with health, housing, and education, we'll get to a better food system when power is redistributed back to the people, especially the people working in the factories and farm fields. This is going to take systems change away from capitalism and neoliberal policies to an economic and governing system in which money is in speech. The people own the means of production, and where the food system is designed to actually feed people in the long term, not to maximize ruling class wealth through extraction and exploitation. It's going to take changes like a more unionized food workforce that gets higher wages and less working hours, farm worker-owned food production, and public grocery stores. Changes like breaking up the big integrators monopolizing agribusinesses and redistributing their privatized property, like land, back to indigenous peoples and rural communities. Changes like funding agriculture that's biodiverse and place-based and slowing down processing lines and ending the use of CAFOs such that production is, yes, decreased, but food is distributed so that everyone eats and there's less waste. We can socialize the food system and decommodify food. We can have a food system based on culture, biodiversity, and resilience during climate change. There are large movements of indigenous, small-scale, and subsistence food growers who have been doing this very thing, working toward food sovereignty and resisting the corporate-controlled food system for that system's whole, relatively short existence. To push us further on this path, I think people, including myself, need to get more involved with growing food, like in community gardens, and sharing food, like through mutual aid. More people need to build relationships with the ecosystems they're a part of and nurture understandings of interdependence, how climate change will impact where they live, and the history of where they live and how that history connects to places beyond it and the present moment. We get closer to transforming the food system when we support and join unions, grow community, and stand up for one another, like helping people being targeted by ICE, disrupting business as usual, and resisting imperialism. There's a lot of ways to challenge this food system and the people profiting from it. Those are some of my closing thoughts after putting this together, but I'd like to end with some final questions that I had for Monica, Maria, and Gabby and their responses. What are some of the biggest takeaways you've learned from going up against industrial agriculture?
The biggest takeaways?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a good question. So I think a community's power is already within them. When I think back about the community I came from, and it seems like in the beginning when folks call you, because we don't dig our finger in, people call us if they have a problem, is that you can have studies, and I can remember people would research, and we had hired an attorney for our community when it was fighting a permit. And he said, you know what? You can have a U-Haul full of studies, but the other side's going to have a U-Haul full of studies too. So a community is always looking for the silver bullet. Like, let me talk to this person can. And the strength is actually within that community and their right to use their voice, right? Within this, within the country. That is your power. Your power is in your voice. And when folks stand up, I've seen them win some great battles that you wouldn't think possible. So it's really about a community sticking together and standing up for themselves in the end.
Here's Monica's biggest takeaway.
The main one is do not be afraid to speak truth to power. Do not be afraid for those who may try to intimidate you when you're standing on righteousness, when you're on the right side. Do not be afraid, because a lot of people, and this is what happened with us, they're just waiting for somebody else to take the first step. A lot of people don't want to be the first one. They don't want to stick their neck out. But you have to have some frontline warriors willing to step out. So, and when you do, more people will come. And when you're standing on right, you can affect change, even if it's incremental change, you know? And I'm super proud of what has happened, what we have been able to accomplish, and what we still do to this day, fighting permits and testifying. I'm now a commissioner on the Environmental Justice State Commission because of this work, where I get to have more direct communication, direct line with communities all across the state, honestly. But I can illuminate things that were kept in the shadows. This rural community did a very good job of crafting a narrative that they kept insulated. And by us going across the bridge and talking to newspapers across the way, we got to show the whole picture. And so those are some of the biggest things. And don't be afraid to try to create some bills, some legislation. It may not happen now, but it will happen at some point. So coming together, speaking truth to power, staying consistent, you're going to win.
As for Gabby, she had advice for future frontline warriors and activists.
I would say if anybody's ever thinking about becoming an environmental activist, there's a lot of things you need to do. And when I work with communities now, this is the very first thing that I talk to them about, is protecting yourself. You will burn out very fast if you take things personally, if you lead with a lot of emotion, if you just come guns blazing, bulldozing through, you will find that you will burn yourself out very quickly. You need to protect yourself. It's not worth it. It's not worth losing your job. It's not worth having people attack you online. It's not worth getting your house egged, because that's happened to me. Now people aren't egging houses anymore because we have an egg crisis. But, people would follow me years ago. It was a huge toll on my emotional and mental well-being. But I always have to just go back to we literally did so much. We accomplished so much. We protected people. We didn't win every fight. We didn't. We just couldn't accomplish it all. But I will say, for the greater whole, especially in the state of Maryland, we did make huge strides to hopefully protecting the environment, as well as the Delmarva Peninsula.
Are there any final thoughts you'd like to add from what we talked about today?
Yeah, I want to just encourage everybody to think about or research, where's your food come from? How's it made? And if you're happy with that, and if you find out how it's, if it's doing things that contribute negatively to the environment, to, your air, water, and etc., say something. Get involved. Don't just not know the source of what you're consuming. Get more actively involved. And even if you live in a city, you can do that as well. You could still find out, where does this come from? How was it raised? How is it grown? Did the farmer get actually decent money? And I know it's a hard topic right now because, food is ridiculously high. But now's a good time where people start doing co-oping. Start swapping. Okay, I can do this for you and you give me eggs and butter and stuff from your farm. Creativity is going to happen, but we can make a difference. We can make a difference, even if it's bit by bit. And if you're in a place where you just can't do anything right now, it's fine. But you can share information. You can share and let people know what's going on.
Are there any other thoughts that you'd like to leave people with?
We are, trying to do everything we can to make sure that people look very closely at what they're doing and where they're putting things, because I think we have to really give that a second look. And I think everyone we need consumers, we need, if you care about your tax dollars, how are your tax dollars being used? How's public money being invested? If you care about public health, if you care about the quality of what you're feeding your family, there's so many reasons to care about our food system. And I think a lot of people feel helpless, but that's not the case. And I think it takes all of us to unite to push for that better system. We know that we need to protect our soils. We know that we need clean air and clean water to function. It's not brain surgery.
Hey, this is Carly. Thank you for listening to the last episode of No Land Farms. If you appreciated the series and are able to help out, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description of the episode to toss the project a couple of dollars. If you can't do that, though, sharing the podcast with more people or leaving a kind review is helpful too. Thank you so much, especially for listening.